And I would like now to invite Luka Popović to stay, as he is the chair of the first session of the conference. Please, to open the conference as to start the first session.
Thank you. The opening ceremony is finished, and we are pleased to start with the working part of the conference. The first Spig conference was held in Belgrade in 1962. And now we have third Spig. Therefore, our first lecture will be given by academician Zoran Petrović, who has made a significant contribution to Spig conference series. He will talk about history of the Spig. Professor Petrović, please.
Thank you. Well, when they ask you to give presentation on the history rather than on your science, it means that you have grown old, but that gives you some freedom. You can make a lot of mistakes and you can privatize things. And I want to start with a personal note. I became acquainted with Spig conference when I was 7 or 8 years old. There was this girl in the neighborhood whose father used to attend Spig, and I was in love with her, needless to comment, and her words carried a lot of weight in my brain. So she told me stories about this conference where they go, where people are making all sort of jokes, having fun, doing science. And that haunted me. One typical joke that she told me was this gentleman, Marko Popović, who is really, really tall, really big and strong. Unfortunately, he passed away, and he was one of the pillars of the Spig community, was helping French visitor to come to hotel, bring his stuff. And French visitor was vertically challenged. So I was told who said that, but I won't quote the name. They shouted at him, "Why don't you carry him, Marco? It would be easier because he has to make 2 steps when you make only 1." And that picture stuck in my mind. And whenever I was about to make a choice on my future career, I could not really accept that my future would be incompatible with Spig. And I just stuck there. Now, this is a lovely picture that we made for 20th Spig, when we put together and made this flower of books of invited lectures. There is a bit of cheating, maybe 1 or 2 books are missing. But basically, this is the heritage of Spig, and I will talk about these books a little bit further. But let's start from the beginning. When and where was Spig created? Those were early 60s, when science was thriving, when science was progressing, and gas discharges, binary collisions, plasmas, collisions with surfaces, they had long history of accidental discoveries, like discoveries of all sorts of discharges in 19th century, but most of these fields were put on a firm scientific footing first at the beginning of the 20th century, and things only improved from there. And basically, passage of electricity through gases was always associated with some application. I get really angry when a reviewer in some journal says, well, this is not really plasma. This is not really physics, this is engineering. Just because actually gas discharges have produced a lot of applications and were really instrumental in applications such as first lasers, gas lasers, such as studies of ionosphere and atmosphere charges, and many, many things. Elementary particle detectors and many other major applications were founded on the physics that is studied by Spig. And this is only one of the 4 major directions of Spig. In Yugoslavia, in former Yugoslavia, gas discharges were used occasionally here and there. For instance, one chemist, Sima Lozanic, used it at the beginning of 20th century. But actually, physics in former Yugoslavia was blocked by this nuclear weapon dream because we had potential to develop it, apparently. And of course, that dream dispersed very quickly. So the 3 major federal institutes which were founded to support this nuclear dream imploded, and a lot of people moved on to universities, for instance. And universities in this country are strange contraptions. They are basically confederations of completely separate faculties. So physicists were isolated from other physicists at the same university, and institutes were founded to build resources, to build connections, libraries, experimental facilities, to promote work in physics at the university level. And that was time when things were growing. There was growth, there was money, not much, but enough to send several people to get educated. And the first generation of Spig physicists was actually somewhere in world getting specialized in physics of ionized gases like Konjević and Labat, and binary collisions, Kurepa-Njanev, and plasma surface interactions, Professor Navinšek from Ljubljana, and many, many others. When you look at the map of conferences which have similar topics, I know only of 2 conferences which are older than Spig. Those are Gaseous Electronics Conference of American Physical Society, which is 72 years old, and another APS conference, Division of Plasma Physics, which is 62 years old. Similar age, okay, there are 3 conferences. Similar age can be defined for ICPIG, which is international equivalent of Spig, though it doesn't cover all the fields. It is 70 years old. And ICPIEC, a binary collision conference, originally now Atomic and Molecular and Optical Physics Conference, sprung from ICPIG. So you could say that it is also 70 years old, but when you look at the numbers, it is a little bit younger than Spig. All other conferences, like European Spig, SCAMPIG, is younger. It's at the level of 25 biannual conferences, and many more conferences, just they didn't last as long as Spig did. You could also claim that Spig had some influence in the world, and a lot of similar conferences were developed. For instance, there is weight, vacuum, electron, and ion technologies conference in Bulgaria, which overlaps quite a lot with Spig, with a little bit more emphasis on solid-state physics, and has very similar principles. Pacific Rim Conference on Pacific Rim, GEM Conference in Australia, and there are many summer schools. The most prominent was the Bad Honnef Summer School, which is now united with Eindhoven, and it oscillates between those 2 places. That all says that actually principles that were built into Spig are still relevant and being pursued in the world. Spig has 4 directions: atomic collision processes, plasma physics. They were defined from the beginning. Collisions with surfaces also started almost immediately, but the 4th topic sprung from the low temperature plasmas, which used to be plasma physics in general, and it changed its name, it changed its direction. It started with energy issues, fusion. Now it's more oriented towards astrophysics. So these 4 fields are perhaps now well defined and worth following. This is what we are talking about in this presentation. 30 conferences. I don't know if anybody can see names of cities where the conference was organized, names of principal organizers, and names of chairs of the scientific committee. And that is the history of Spig. So basically, I can only show you this slide, and that should be enough. But we cannot start without mentioning Dr. Brana Petrović, who not only that she was well-established scientist and leader, but had tremendous ability to organize things, was director of the Vinci Institute. She was a lady full of energy. She was my professor. I remember her very well. And she initiated a series of conferences on ionized gases. And she had kindred spirits. For instance, in Zagreb, there was Zdenko Sternberg and George Bosan in Niš, and a little bit later on in Ljubljana, Professor Novinšek and others. And that's how Spig started. And the first 3 conferences were used to present results of research in former Yugoslavia. They were presented in local languages, Serbian, Serbo-Croatian, whatever. And it was okay. There were many other conferences that started at the same time in different fields with similar scope and goal. But Brana Petrović, oh, okay, this is a photo of from the second Spig from collection of Zdenko Sternberg. Even person as old as I am, cannot recognize more than 4 or 5 people in this photo. But for instance, you can find here a very, very young Nikola Konjević, and also some other people that you may recognize and that I don't. And it is fun for anybody to actually pursue that. And Zdenko Sternberg had this photo on his walls in his office. Anyway, Brana Petrović met by accident Alfred von Engel, a leading ionized gas professor in United Kingdom, professor of Oxford, who had a house at Adriatic coast near Dubrovnik. And she told him about our meetings, and he told her, hey, why don't I bring some of my colleagues and we will educate you folks, your young students. We can give you a summer school. And that's how, in '64, in addition to Spig conference, Physics of Ionized Gases summer school started with 7 really leading names in the field, each giving several lectures, mostly in English. Only Professor Demkov gave lectures in Russian, or at least he gave presentation for the book in Russian. I don't know how his lectures were presented, because I was in my elementary school at that time. And that is how summer school started. And by the year 68, those two merged. So somebody asked what is S standing for. Yes, it is Symposium, but it used to be 3 S's: Summer School and Symposium on Physics of Ionized Gases. Then they would drop this summer school part, then they would put it back again, and now it's mostly Symposium on Physics of Ionized Gases, but we should not forget that it should have educational purpose. Unfortunately, we could not solicit help from von Engel anymore because a small village on the Adriatic coast was connected to electric grid, and von Engel didn't want to stay for 2 months during summer in a house that had electricity. He wanted a house that didn't have electricity, and he moved out and never returned. So we had to find, Brana Petrović and others, and me in the elementary school, of course, we had to find a way to keep Spig going. And Spig immediately reached its peak. They started with high ambitions. In 68, they changed the principles. Everything should be in English. Well, 68 was sort of transition year. Then they started shooting with other principles, like top international scientists give invited talks, young PhDs from Yugoslavia present their work for thesis. They learn how to make presentations, but they're also judged by these high-ranking scientists who give invited lectures. And there are, of course, contributed papers. A conference should be defined as international. They met all the standards of the Ministry of Science, but that's nonsense. Anything that's prescribed by sort of lawyers, by barristers, whoever works in the ministry and defines regulations, becomes ridiculous. It is how the conference is accepted internationally, and it has been accepted as international conference everywhere. So that was result of these strong principles that they adhere to, and they also took care of teaching young generations. This is 68, and you can see I just put one list of contributed papers. I have to apologize. Because of this situation, I had limited access, and because of my personal situations, I had limited access to my files, to my books, to my shelves, to my office. So I could not prepare it as well as I could have, and I could only photograph rather than scan on the flat scanner. But you can see here that actually in 68, every third paper was still in Serbo-Croatian, but most of them were in English. Okay. Further principles, of course, were that you had to have book of contributed papers and book of invited lectures. And I will discuss this thing which most of the young people attending Spig these days cannot comprehend. What is book of invited lectures? Where does that happen? Well, not on this planet anymore, but it was the norm. And it was the highest level of your achievement when you can show that you have written a full text for invited lecture which got published in some book of invited lectures. It was going to be used by young generations, it was going to be used by your colleagues, and it was a big deal. Now we publish technical papers. As said, replacement for book of invited lectures. We don't have time to write up review articles anymore. Okay, I will not go into all the details. In 1970, the blue books started with invited lectures. First Professor Navinšek, and you will notice Herceg Novi occurring and reoccurring. That was location of the Federal Nuclear Commission's facility on the coast, and those people from the three big federal institutes, Vinča, Jožef Štefan, and not Ruđer Bošković when they organized Spig, they used Herceg Novi as a facility. Professor Kurepa was not in Vinča, so he had to go to Hotel Love in Split, and that's how actually Spig started moving around, which people found interesting and sort of improvement, because they were not happy with the crowded nature of the location in Herceg Novi. There were too many participants for the limited facility. Okay, I will just mention few of the invited speakers which defined changes in topics. Especially those in red will be mentioned. Raoul Franklin replaced von Engel as a professor of ionized gases at Keble College in Oxford. And he knows more about history of ionized gases than anybody that I've met. The biggest friend of Spig was Hans Werner Dravin. He was so present that actually I used to make mistake, and for Darwin I would say Dravin, which was quite embarrassing when you go to Australia and then misname one of the capitals of Australian states. Anyway, Dravin was fusion, atomic and molecular physics. I asked him, are you a theorist or experimentalist? And he said, I am a physicist. And yes, that's what he was. All his theories had a bit of experiment and a lot of thinking built into it, and vice versa. Okay. You can also see here, for instance, that collisions with surfaces became big deal early on, and speakers in that realm, like Hagström, the biggest name in my book for secondary electron production on surfaces, was early guest. I wish I have met him. I've never met him. Okay. And then there was conference in Rovinj organized by Vladis Vujnović from Zagreb. He was expert on astrophysical data, line transition probabilities, things like that. And of course, but not at his conference, but at the next conference organized by Navinšek, you found important name of Hans Grimm, author of the Bible in for line shapes, but also McCracken, big name in surface collisions, Gilbuddy and others. These were all big names at those times and still are. Okay, to continue with principles, conference got stuck on one issue. Foreigners were giving plenary lectures, our scientists were giving progress reports, and young PhDs were giving progress reports. So Hans Werner Dravin became member of the science committee and started pushing for Yugoslav scientists of high international ranking to start giving invited lectures. And his case that he pursued was that Ratko Janev should give invited lecture presentation, and that's what happened. And after that, the gates were open, and suddenly our scientists were able to give invited lectures at all levels, showing that actually a lot of them had equivalent achievements to the leading international scientists. Okay. Maybe I should just point out, I don't have a laser. I don't see it. I can see it outside the screen, but I don't see it on the screen. Liveliest parts of the conference proved to be poster sessions. Most people actually came to present their work rather than listen to others. And conference dinner. And Spig was one of unique conferences that promoted dancing as entertainment rather than after-dinner speeches, which is so popular in United States, for instance. In '78, important thing happened. A young student who just finished Faculty of Electrical Engineering attended Spig for the first time. That was Zoran Petrović or myself. And I didn't have money for that, so they put me on the committee, and one of my tasks was to sell old books. And believe me, they were really sought after. They were really popular. And I became popular because then I could choose, and for instance, somebody from Eastern Germany who didn't have money, I would give him books without payment. And I would charge those that come from rich countries, of course. I was like Robin Hood. Big names that were there were Howard Taylor, Dick Hall, but the biggest name definitely was Sir David Bates. Sir David Bates was notorious for not attending conferences. One of his PhD students was from Belgrade, Istok Mendaš, and Istok Mendaš got James Bond-like assignment to persuade Bates to come to Spig meeting. And they realized, Ratko Janev and Istok, that Bates was married for the second time with quite a bit younger wife who really enjoyed marrying into Sir or Lady. I forgot her name. I met her and she's a very nice person. And they put pressure on David through his wife. They told his wife about beauties of Dubrovnik, about amazing time they would have there, and Sir David had to go to Spig in '78. One of the rare appearances of David Bates on conferences with so many participants. He would only attend limited number specialized discussion sessions of 20 people, not more. Anyway, David Bates was really big name in those times. I was just a student then, but then I became friends with most of the people on this list, basically. Which just tells you how old I am. And people like Gordon Dunn, Tilman Merck, and others, they actually helped a lot. But looking at these names, you can actually ask yourself, which of our physicists went to that laboratory and learned the trade? Istok Čadež went to work with Dick Hall. A lot of people collaborated with Schmidtkowski, excellent theorist from Poland. Frank Reed, a lot of people from Kurepa's group went there, especially Cvejanović and his wife. Gordon Dunn, Nada Đurić was with Gordon, and Belić was with Gordon Dunn. So a lot of people from Institute of Physics worked with Kraft, Marko Popović and Dragutin Đorđević and others. really these Spigs became a way for young students to see what these people are doing, contact them, and have an opportunity to come and work with them. Okay. In 1980, when that young student was in the army, so he couldn't attend, a fourth section was introduced. It was labeled energy-related questions or something, but you should read fusion. Later it was all sorts of plasmas, and then astrophysical plasmas, and I don't know what the label is these days. Okay, in 82, Goran Pikler from Zagreb organized conference in Rovinj. In 84, Marko Popović from Belgrade in Šibenik. My thesis supervisor, Bob Crompton, attended that one, but I couldn't because I was down under in Australia. But for instance, a person who attended that same Spig was Francis Chan, and I learned plasma physics from Francis Chan's book. So all these people who wrote books that I used, von Engel and Francis Chan, were sort of highest on my pedestal of scientists, even though there could have been much better scientists, but those who did not write textbooks, did not project into the young, impressionable minds of physics students as much as those who wrote books. Stan Webrzek brought in a lot of weird, crazy plasma applications. He collaborated with Jelena Kurepa and many, many people, Nimax, with people from Zagreb, I think, and many people were important. Mitjo Inokuti also. Franz Linder was overlapping with Kurepa's group very much, but I don't remember if anybody was in Franz Linder's lab until later on. Anyway, these were the best days of Spig conference. They continued in '86 when Jagoš Purić organized another conference in Šibenik. For instance, 3 people that I would meet next year and become friends with them were there, and I was there, but we did not converse. Jim Lawler, Karchi Roja, and Alan Gallagher, because I was yet to actually meet them and work with them. Big name, for instance, in 1988 was Fortov, who became Minister of Science in New Russia under Yeltsin's government. And he was very important in making it possible for dusty plasma experimentalists to send their experiments to the space station to carry out experiments without the gravity and be able to observe behavior of dusty plasmas in these pristine conditions where gravity is not spoiling and limiting the size of dust particles. Anyway, Rudy Balescu, John Allen Rees, my thesis examiner, and Demtroder, laser spectroscopy, and Kunze, laser spectroscopy specialists, were all there. These were changing times. Lasers were becoming big deal. Mihailescu was using lasers to produce plasma. Kunze and Demtroder to do spectroscopy. Stvoli also was using lasers to do manipulate ion mobilities and ions. So these were new winds that were blowing in the world, and we were able to get first-hand information. Okay? But we reached the implosion of the country. The first sense of the doom I felt when at Dubrovnik Spig, which was otherwise excellent conference, with really fantastic people present there. My friend from Japan, Toshiaki Makabe, Joachim, Kimura, Eckstein, surfaces, and David Graves, basically biggest competitor with Mark Kushner for the leading position in USA in the field of low temperature plasmas. But you could hear the propaganda everywhere for the speakers in streets. You could hear that Spig would not return to Dubrovnik for quite a long time, and it still hasn't. So war happened, breakup of the country happened, and Spig was in a weird situation. Majority of members, actually all but one, of the scientific committee were in Belgrade. Nobody was doing anything to discuss Spig. At that time, somebody else was chairman of the committee. So that person passed that chairmanship to me and asked me, can you take care of it? And by the way, Milan Dimitrijević is pushing for the organization of Spig. We are already in beyond year 92 when Spig was supposed to happen. So we had split vote, and I had to cast the decision vote, and I decided in favor of organizing Spig conference. The primary reason was that we are doing this for students. They need opportunity to present their work, to learn from somebody, and to learn by presenting. And there was a whole generation that didn't have opportunity to do so. So I said we should do as much as we can to maintain this facility for students to develop themselves. On a really, really bad note, that was time where we already started publishing invited lectures by internationally renowned publisher. First it was World Scientific, then it was Nova Science Publishers, and people from Vinča who organized this Spig found money to organize publication by Nova Science Publishers, paid it, but they never delivered the books. So I can freely say that that was a major theft by a renowned science publisher. We were able to secure 5 copies. Then we realized that they split book into 2 books. So instead of being editor of 1 book, I became suddenly editor of 2 books, neither of whom had appropriate name for the conference. They were named after these little sections that we had. That was said, so we returned to publishing within our modest abilities, and the next conference was significantly better, with more participants, more invited speakers. It was organized by my institute, but we published the proceedings in Svetske fizičkih nauka volumes in physical sciences, a series of publications by the Institute of Physics, Belgrade. Okay, and you had to be a really good friend of ours to come to Belgrade at those times, like Fumiyoshi Tochikubo, like Piz, like Evangelos Gogolides. Tochikubo had to fly to Budapest, and then we went by a small car to pick him up there and bring him with 4 hours wait at the border. 3 other students were with him, full Yugo of Japanese participants of Spig, waited for 4 hours at the border at 2 a.m. You had to be a good friend to come to Spig in those days, and they really were. When Spig continued afterwards, it was a bit easier, but of course Yugoslavia was still breaking up, war was still going on, airlines were still closed, you had to go through Budapest. And on top of it all, the next conference, organized in Kotor by people from Novi Sad, had to struggle with the earthquake, which happened right when we all went out to sit in the main square and drink something at 8:30 in the evening. And of course, the Japanese were the first to notice that there is earthquake going on. Unfortunately, I lost the book of the 1908 Spig. Then my colleagues found it just a few hours ago, but I was not able to take down a list of names. But those were excellent people. My visitors were Rob Robson and Nader Sadeghi, top-notch scientists from France and Australia, and that is year 98. Spig was organized by the Faculty of Physics. Now, year 2000, we were supposed to organize it at the Institute of Physics, but then there was an idea to organize it between 3 institutions because it was 20th Spig. So we did it together with Physics Department and Vinča Institute. Kurepa and Labat were supposed to talk about history of Spig, but Kurepa had a heart attack, and Milan Kurepa was really the principal force behind the first 20 Spig conferences, in addition to Brana Perović. Unfortunately, Kurepa could not attend the meeting because of his heart attack, and he died soon, within 1 month after Spig conference. But it was a very successful conference. A lot of fantastic speakers. Our friend Steve Bachman was there, and he attended many meetings. And when we were going to that meeting, during night in a minivan, 9 of us, a man came to the edge of the road, took out 2 guns and started firing those guns. Next, I look at Steve, and he couldn't be found. He was hiding under his seat. And I told him, Steve, it is wedding. If he wanted to shoot you, he would aim at you. He's aiming up. And we are too close to him for the bullets to come back and fall on our heads. A sad note, Werner Lindinger, another good friend, he made a lot of money, bought a big ranch in States and beach property in Hawaii, and after Spig, he flew to Hawaii, where he drowned and died at a young age and the top of his success. We could see Francesco Pergoraro, who helped us a lot during sanctions and bombing of Serbia, former Yugoslavia, and also former Spig people who made it big in the United States, like Lepša Vušković and Toza Popović, to come and give presentations again. Okay, after these difficult years, we bounced back, and we had Spig conferences in Soko Banja, Bajina Bašta, And I have many stories about all these conferences. I see some people returning, like Jean-Paul Booth. And it became business as usual. Interesting thing was that we started with workshops and satellites. First, Škorić started with Japan-Serbia satellite, and Professor Jagoš Purić with Serbia-Belarus. And then we started with actually a workshop that was part of the program of the conference, which spread, and actually at some point you had 3 workshops happening when Spig was reduced from 5 days to 3. The other 2 days were left for workshops to be organized. That brought a lot of speakers and also a lot of interest into Spig conference. And I don't have time to go into details, but anyway, in 2006, we had both very successful but also a sad conference, because one of the people at the conference died just before the conference dinner. A long time participant at Spig meetings, and that was a really sad moment. Also, weather was unusually cold, but there were so many good speakers, so many good lectures, and this Spig, in spite of these sad events, proved to be really successful. Similar trend continued in Novi Sad, organized by Luka Popović and Milan. Another set of workshops were organized too by Professor Kuraica. That was in Donji Milanovac in 2010. I want to show you, for instance, one name is Mike Charlton there. I cannot see. But anyway, we started working with, big names were Kogelschatz and Hamaguchi. And, Charlton was not there. He was at the next Spig, but his right hand, Dick Van Werf, was here. So we were big into positron physics. And you can see now that group photos became prominent and displayed on web, so I could download them. The same goes for conference in Zrenjanin, which actually, I must say, had fantastic line of low temperature plasma people there. Mark Kushner, Annemie Bogerts, Ute Ebert, leading theorists in low temperature plasmas, and Jean-Michel Pouvet, leading experimentalist in low temperature plasma medical applications. This was really a line that I don't think that any conference had that year such a strong team. Another person of importance was Mike Charlton. He is a big name in science. He's making antimatter, trying to see what happens to antimatter and explain differences. And in year 2014, another positron expert came, and I will just need 2 or 3 more minutes. His name was David Cassidy, also fantastic scientist. Most of his papers go to Phys.Rev Letters, but more than that, he extended the scope of services provided by Spig. He got married as part of Spig program. Now, I know of several people who got married after meeting at Spig conferences, including a gentleman from France and a lady from France who have never met in France, but they met at Spig. And that is the thing that you get by mixing 4 different topics. We all go to very specialized conferences, but here now we can find mates in other fields. Anyway, David Cassidy and Anna Bankovic, 2 of the speakers at the conference, had another duty. which was just a day before opening ceremony. So Spig is providing complete service. You get your PhD, you meet love of your life, and you get married at Spig. Cannot be more romantic than that. And 2016 and 2018 just continued, defined by our collaborations, by our workshops, and you could say that Spig had fantastic future just by staying at the same level. Unfortunately, you people from the organizing committee know what's going on. You know how difficult it was, and I cannot thank you enough, and I cannot say that enough that you are not in envious position, that you are in very difficult position, and I thank you for your efforts to bring in Spig in the time of cholera, as Marquez would say. I just need to say one thing at the end, and this is my last slide. In the last 2 years, 2 pillars of Spig community died. Zdenko Sternberg, one of the organizers of First Spigs, he died in the 98th year of his life. Ratko Janev died quite a bit younger. Both of them were very different, but very important in Spig's development. Zdenko knew it all, but he didn't publish papers. People were afraid of his questions. He knew just about everything. Ratko was ambitious at the highest level of international achievements, and he was accepted as high achiever. And that young girl that told me about Spig from the beginning, she decided to get married to me. And we spent life with a lot of overlap with Spig. You can see my wife with Wolfgang Wiese and with Alex Friedman at very different years. And my wife, who taught me about Spig, has passed away this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Petrović, for a very nice talk and also talk from his history. This point of view, your point of view, is something that I remember Spig from 90s and enjoying Spig all time. And then, how to say, Spig is something that we have emotion. We put emotion in Spig, and many friends we met during the Spig. Thank you once again. Now I open for discussion question. If someone would like to ask Professor Petrović, please. If do we have some hand raising? No. Thank you very much, Professor Petrović. Especially thank you very much, and I'm pleased to see you. And it is my pleasure that you accepted to give a lecture in spite of, as you said, private and other problems. And thank you. And we will continue tomorrow. But I heard that we have one question. So please, you can from this. Dragana, would you? Okay. Professor Bratislav Obradović would like to ask or comment, please.
You can speak now.
We can hear you, please.
Professor Petrović, I would like to thank you for your very inspiring presentation of the history of the Spig. And I just learned a lot of things I didn't know. And this is just just want to take, have no any further question.
Okay, Bratislav, thank you very much.
May I just say something to Bratislav? It is your duty to carry on, and not just yours, but everybody else's. So please stick to the principles and stick to the goals, and please keep the Spig spirit alive.
Okay, thank you once again, and tomorrow we will start with at 9. I'm right, and chair will be Professor Petrović. So see you tomorrow.
See you.